Well, hey everybody, welcome back to Tree.Church Bible Study. My name is Chris Reed, and I'm the host today of the podcast, and really excited to be here today. We are going to be wrapping up 1 Corinthians today. We're looking at the last chapter, chapter 16, but more so, I'm excited by the fact that we have, for the very first time, Anthony Lombardi. How are we doing, Anthony?
Doing well, man. Glad to be here.
Awesome. I'm going to ask you a couple questions here in a second, but I want to introduce our other guests as well. We got Mick Harper. How are we doing today, Mick?
I'm doing well.
Good. That's awesome, man. Well, thank you both for being here. Now, Anthony, it's your very first time. Really excited to have you on the show. Why don't you, I do this with everybody that comes on the show, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do here at the Tree, and then how the Bible has really played a role in your everyday faith.
Yeah. So got hired a little over a month ago. The process was obviously a little bit longer than that, a little bit drawn out, lots of meetings, but got hired as the campus pastor of the first campus that we're planning and preparing to launch this upcoming year. So just super excited about that. So a lot of the stuff I'm doing right now is just getting prepared, working with Mackie and just kind of getting everything in order, getting it ready to go. But as far as my, personal journey, the Bible has played obviously a huge role. I think that's kind of the Jesus juke answer, right? Where that's the right answer. But for me, that was one of the pivotal things in my formation, right? Early on when I came to faith, I just had a ferocious hunger for Scripture. And that was actually probably part of what I sense was God's call into ministry, a love for Scripture, a desire to teach it, desire to make it known. So yeah, obviously every day, try to make that a discipline to get in the Word.
Sure.
And, I'm amazed that still after these years, you can read the same passage over and over again, and God will speak to you new things and reveal things to you through it. So
that's awesome, man. That's amazing. That's one of those questions that I ask because I think it's beneficial for people to hear like our stories with it. Cause I know like for me, like it was very much once I dug into the theological side of Scripture, like that's when it really came alive for me.
Yeah.
And so all of us are just different in the ways we engage the Word and how we've come about to the place where we find it so beneficial for our lives. So. So thank you for sharing that, and so getting to know you a little bit over the last couple months, I've come to find out that you're an outdoors guy, so you like outdoors things, and Mick, I know you're an outdoors type of guy too. So for our kind of introduction, get to know you questions, I just had a little fun scenario that I thought I'd play out for us, and ask you guys some questions on that. Does that sound good?
That sounds good.
Awesome. All right, so we're in a survival situation, and if you're stuck, let's say you guys want to go warm or cold.
I'll say cold.
Okay.
yeah, that's fine.
Okay. So we crashed plane in Canada. We crashed plane in Canada. Not quite winter yet. Still fall. Getting cold, but not. You're not going to die, but
I like
from
this setup.
the cold. So, if this is the scenario that you're in, give me two skill sets of people that you're hoping are with you. So it's not just you by yourself. You got a group of people with you. And then two items that you're going to make sure that you rummage out of the plane and keep with you while you're stranded. So little survival scenario for you. Either one.
Mick,
can
you want to go? Go ahead.
All right. The two skill sets of people that I want to have with me. I want to have someone that has the ability to make fire.
Okay.
Because I feel like that would be my weakness. Like I need a torch and some gas or something. That's definitely not a strong suit. And then someone that has the ability to work as a team. I think that in survival that would be super important. Trying to survive with somebody that's just annoying, wants to do their own thing all the time. I think that'd be super difficult. And then the two items that I'd like to have with me. One reason that I'd like to have somebody make a fire is so that I didn't have to take a fire starter. So I'm taking a knife and a pot, some way to boil water. We're landing in Canada. I can do some fishing, some hunting up there. So I want to have something to be able to cook with, boil water, keep it clean. So those are my two items, two people.
Awesome. What about you?
Man, I thought like so much more specifically as far as the people. Like I was thinking of a forager and a trapper.
There you go. Hey.
Somebody that knows plants, knows like wild things that you can eat. Because if it's up to me, like other than like raspberries, I'm out of luck. Like I don't know. So somebody who's a forager who knows what to eat. What mushrooms, plants, and then a trapper, someone who's like an expert in being able to trap animals. just because I think like the hunting, fishing part, I've got that down. Much of my life I've spent doing that. As far as the tools, one would be like a good solid knife, probably like a hunting knife or a bushcraft type knife, and then probably a fire starter. So to counter what you were saying, that's one of those things that you don't want to end up having to try to do on your own. There's ways to do it. You can make a bow drill, all that stuff, but even the pros struggle sometimes with that. So yeah, probably a knife and a fire starter, and then I'm hoping that I can find some scrap metal or something in the woods to use for other things. So
very cool. I'm taking a phone and a walkie-talkie, so
you're calling your way back.
I'm calling my way back out.
A satellite
phone.
Yeah.
No, I think for me, like 2 skill sets I'm looking for are, I think I'm looking for somebody who is able to, I like your thought process with that, Mick, of like, I want somebody who is able to kind of organize and keep everybody working in the same direction. But then also too, like, I think even the practical side for me, having somebody there who can, is efficient at taking care of finding food. And so would understand, like, I want to combine your forager and your trapper. And so like let them,
you just want somebody who happens to be a survivalist.
Yeah. Somebody who's a survivalist
And a chef.
Yeah. And I'm going to be completely unoriginal with my 2 items. I'm going to go the same direction. Like, I want something I can boil water in, so I have water, and then I want a knife. Particularly a kukri knife, just because they're so versatile in splitting wood, chopping wood, like doing everything you pretty much need to do. So
it's cool.
So yeah, just fun little scenario to kind of walk through. So we're going to shift gears here. My second question to you has little to do with being stuck somewhere where it's a high stress situation. This one is more like, what is your favorite way to unwind and relax when you have time, or you're either stressed out and you need to go do something to unwind and relax, or if you just find yourself just chilling out for the day, like what's your go-to? Mick, you want to start?
Yeah. For me, it sounds like I want to go get lost because want to be in a survival situation.
Mick wants to crash a plane in Canada.
Because mine was hunting, fishing, sitting around a fire. So, I mean, it just sounds like I'm surviving. I'm not trying to thrive in any way. I'm just chilling out. I love being in a hammock, like getting off work, especially spring or fall or a cool summer evening, being able to lay out in the hammock for a little while. But I'll also say it's slightly situational. Like sometimes a good way to unwind for me is to get a group of friends together too, and just hang out, mindless conversation, something that's not going too deep, but just staying really surface level in conversation and letting my mind unwind with friends.
Laughing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's good. For me, for a few years, actually, so I had a Harley, and that wind therapy, man, that was a real thing. So any chance I got, I would get on it and go riding. Obviously sold it as we continued to have more kids. The liability went up. So I'm hoping someday when they're old enough to embark on that journey again. But similar to Mick, I would say, like most things outdoors right now, with where the kids are at their age and season of life, I'll steal away sometimes to go fishing. I'll go on a hike or walk, just get outdoors. And same as you, like, honestly, like, I love sitting around a fire with people, just, talking about nothing, catching up. That to me is life-giving. If weather is not permitting for some reason, I love movies. Not just general watching any movie, but like trying to actually find good movies with good storylines, that type of stuff. So like cinema. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. For me, it's, if I can get into the woods and I can hike or run, like that for me that is my unwind time. So like that is where I go to just kind of let my brain not do anything, but keep my body moving. So, but yeah, or I'll do the same thing, like watch movies, watch a good show or something like that. Yeah. I like watching TV. So cool. Awesome, guys. Well, thank you so much for taking some time and letting us into kind of your personality and whatnot. We're going to jump into what we're talking about here. Just as we typically do, I just want to give you kind of a recap of what chapter 15 was about and kind of where we're coming from and what Paul's kind of leading into as we wrap this up. We are into the last chapter, so we're looking at a lot of the different ways in which Paul is concluding this letter, because we've already talked about how Corinthians is actually multiple letters throughout this correspondence that he had with the church in Corinth. And so And so this is either one or two or possibly part of three. Like there's just different ways that it kind of combines it. It's laid out. But so Paul is writing with the Corinthian church and just really driving home the idea of unity. And so he's wanting to conclude on these thoughts. Now, last week we talked about in 15, he's talking about death and resurrection, really the culmination of what happens for the believer. And so I know that the group that sat down and talked about that, they did a great job laying that all out and the implications of all of that. But as he concludes that, he's going to be walking us into this place, and he's going to give kind of his last minute instructions to the church as he wraps this letter up. And so that's what we're going to be kind of getting into today. A lot of practical information, a lot of practical things to, if you know what an imperative is, a lot of like, hey, do this and you'll find life. Hey, do this and it will be Christ-like. And so that's what we're going to see a lot of today, and that's what we're going to be going through. So we're going to be breaking up the passage in that couple different ways and talking about the different things that he kind of lays out there. Okay? So let's pick up in 16 verse 1, and I'll read a couple verses here, and then we'll stop and talk a little bit. Now, regarding your question about the money being collected for God's people in Jerusalem, you should follow the same procedure I gave to the churches in Galatia. On the first day of each week, you should each put aside a portion of the money you have earned. Don't wait until I get there and then try to collect it all at once. Man, he sounds like such a dad at times. He's like, now don't put it off to the last minute.
Yeah.
But he says, when I come, I will write letters of recommendation for the messengers you choose to deliver your gift to Jerusalem. And if it seems appropriate for me to go along, they can travel with me. So Paul is kind of giving these last minute instructions. He's saying, hey, I need you to take care of this thing. And really the reason that he has traveled and planted in Corinth, and the reason he has a relationship, is because he's been on these journeys to make this collection for Jerusalem. Now, Anthony, I know you're a Bible guy. You love studying, you love the context and everything. Like, so why don't you give us some context as to what exactly the collection of Jerusalem, what it actually was and why they were doing it and why this was part of Paul's missionary journey?
Sure. Yeah. I first and foremost, I love that, regarding your question about money, like, man, these were people just like you and I, money is a question that comes up, right? Just a practical implication of life and faith. But from what we know, there's other parts in the New Testament. Even just kind of setting the pace, right? Acts chapter 2, when the church first gets together, they set this precedent, right, for generosity of like, we're going to take care of other believers. We're going to take care of those who are in need. And they, distributed the proceeds to anybody had need. That's what it says in Acts chapter 2. So early on in the history of the church, this is like a precedent that they set from the get-go. But there's multiple times you see it in Acts chapter 11. Paul mentions it, Galatians 2, where there's the Jewish Christians in Jerusalem. They're struggling in poverty. There was a famine. There's some serious needs there, and so Paul is basically rallying the troops, to contribute to those needs and saying, hey, look, we have to support these Christians. They're going through a rough time. And I think one of the neatest things about this is obviously he's talking to Gentile Christians here, who are going to be contributing to Jewish Christians. And obviously the context behind that is so interesting because up until this point, right, there's a lot of hostility. This is not even fathomable in the minds of those prior to Christ. And so yet you have Paul here rallying Gentile Christians to basically pay it forward for the Jewish Christians who are in serious need.
Well, and let's thinking about that whole concept, because you said it was such a staple of the early church, the idea of generosity and of caring for each other, and even crossing those ethnic and cultural lines. How does that demonstrate? Because Paul is so focused on the love and the unity within the church, on love and unity within the church. How does a collection such as this, or this type of generosity, how does it both embody the gospel, but how does it create and demonstrate that love within the church?
Yeah. As I was looking at this, I noticed, like, as they're taking up the offering. So you got multiple churches. You've got the Corinth church. You've got the Galatia church taking up an offering to go to Jerusalem. There's obviously a need there. Whether that was famine, poverty, whatever that may have been, there was definitely a need. Yep. And so Paul, rallying the troops, says, you know what? This is a way that we can demonstrate our love, that we can pay it forward to them, is to meet them in their time of need. So I think I think that that them being able to take multiple churches and combine what they have to be able to meet the need of one particular people group is a pretty important lesson.
How does the practicality of it play out in showing love? I mean, I think we think of love as this kind of
it's kind of a
ethereal,
feeling.
yeah, it's kind of a feeling
affection.
type thing, yeah. But Paul gives this very practical example of a way to love. Why does physical acts, or why does tangible things and caring for tangible needs, why is that such an important part of loving as a Christian?
Well, I mean, just at a baseline level, it's how do we define love, right? How does Scripture define love? I mean, you think about something as simple as John 3:16, right? For God so loved the world, he did what? He gave his son. There was an action, I think, of Romans 5:8, while we were still sinners, God showed his love for us this way: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us, right? So there's this action that's demonstrating God's love. And obviously, the Bible says God is love. We're supposed to be imitating him. And so I think it's rooted in concrete action. You have many places. James is a big one. James, chapter 2, he emphasizes the element of faith, but there's a lot of connections there with this practical application. If someone comes to you with a need and you say, go and be warmed and filled without actually doing anything, how are you demonstrating that the love of God and that your faith is actually concrete and real if you're not willing to actually do anything about it?
Yeah.
I think love requires sacrifice too, which is something that they're doing obviously with their finances in this situation. You see, like his call for them to take what they have first and put that aside. If given to their own will, they probably would have held on to the money, and then you would find need in your own life,
sure,
that you would be like, I'm going to spend this money on something else because this is a need that I have. But by having them set that aside, they're making a sacrifice, which then in turn is I think a great demonstration of love. And I think I had touched on that actually in the 1 Corinthians 13 was I think that almost any act of love is going to require sacrifice on your behalf. And so like Anthony said, the giving is a demonstration, a physical act of showing love.
Now, Mick, you lead, you're in charge of missions here at the church, and so you lead different trips all over the world. Maybe explain a little bit how, in those contexts, the things that we've been talking about here, how love is practical and how it takes sacrifice, like how that plays out and how that really becomes you get a microcosm of that, like in a mission trip. How have you fostered that in your trips, and how have you seen that play out as you've traveled with people and seen them learn these concepts?
Yeah, I think that love through service or through giving is something that you have to work on. It's something that you can continually grow in, which is one of the reasons why I advocate short-term mission trips or even longer-term mission trips, is that it gives you the opportunity to serve other people and to feel what it's like to love sacrificially. So even from the start of it, the mission trips are not cheap. To travel anywhere is not cheap, even if you want to go on a short vacation somewhere.
Yeah.
So you're requiring sacrifice right up front to be able to take money, set it aside to pay for a trip so that you can go serve somebody else. So you're starting with the most basic portion of it. And then as you arrive there, you're giving up some of your comforts that you have. Everybody loves their own bed. So you're giving up some of the comforts
Everybody
that you
loves
have.
air conditioning.
Exactly. You're giving up some of the comforts that you have to go serve another people group. So you're giving of your time at that point. And then even some of the even more basic things. Actually, I was on a trip recently and got back from it with your son. And as we were sharing a little bit, and I don't think he would mind me saying, but he's like, kids aren't my favorite thing in the world. But as I was out there, I felt like God had put it on my heart, like, hey, this is a people group that you need to serve and you need to love, even though they're not your favorite. They're stinky, they're germy. There's a lot of things that go along with kids. He's like, and they're not my favorite, but it was a way for him to demonstrate his love to them by taking some of the things that his preferences, setting them aside and serving them. So I think it's a great opportunity to just get away from the norm and kind of relearn how to love other people.
Can I piggyback on that real quick?
Yeah, 100%.
So one of the things you said earlier, you just kind of pointed out that they're talking about, Paul's talking about setting the money aside first. And I think like this entire thing is so countercultural, right? Because most of the time, the way that we think about it is I will give what I have left, right?
Yeah,
so I'm going to start with myself, start with my needs, my wants, whatever I have left, then we'll throw a little change in the pot kind of mindset.
Yeah.
And so even what you're talking about with missions trips, it's flipping the script of like thinking about the other first. And I think that captures so well the essence of love, right? It's thinking about the other. It's fighting for the highest good of someone else. And for that to happen, obviously concrete action is the only way to truly demonstrate that.
Well, that's what I was just going to ask is like, even thinking in our everyday lives, I know we talk about the kind of the space with the mission trips, but in our everyday lives, how do we live out this? You mentioned like the purposeness of it. Like it doesn't just happen naturally. Like it doesn't happen like organically as much as we would love it to.
Sure.
Much as we'd love it to. How do we take this purposed action and put it into practice with loving our families or loving our coworkers? And so like, how does it play out in a practical way, or have you seen it play out in a practical way in any of those areas where we could give examples of?
Yeah, I mean, I think a part of this, right, is, I think with love, we often think because I have affection for this person, or I would say I love my spouse, I love my kids, there's somewhat of an apathy that oftentimes follows that, where it's like, because I have a feeling of affection for them, that we just maybe assume that they're going to feel loved, and one of the things like I found out in my marriage, right, is there are certain things that makes my wife feel loved, and there are other things that I do that maybe make her feel loved that she, it doesn't really matter much to her. So I think there's even a part of that where it's like, are you being intentional and proactive? I think needs in some cases, when we're talking about physical needs, tangible needs in the world, it's a little bit easier, right? Because you're like, somebody doesn't have food. Well, if I can prepare them a meal, or I can invite them over, or I can, get them connected to social services, or whatever the case may be. I think a lot of times though, when it comes even to those that are closest to us, it's almost like we don't do enough research, or we're not proactive in the way that we think about what does it actually mean for me to demonstrate my, love. Even my kids, the way that they're wired, it's different. So whether they need quality time or me to play with them or do something, or whether they're the type of kid that needs to hear they're loved all the time or encouraged. So I just think even being proactive and thinking through that, so much of the Christian life does not happen accidentally. And if we're apathetic about it, the quality of it is going to be very poor at best. So I think there's an intentionality that has to come with that, is thinking through, like most things in life, being proactive, having a plan. What does it mean for me to actually demonstrate this?
Yeah, very good. Very good.
Yeah, I think God has called us all into love. And so our obedience in that is going to be the blessing to somebody else. It could be the answer to their prayers. It could be the answers to their needs. As I was trying to think of like a practical example of this, I and don't want to make this a 3-hour podcast, but as a kid, and something that is like completely ingrained in my mind forever. My dad had when he was 28, we were building a house. He ended up paralyzed through sickness. And so at 28 years old, our family's struggling. The insurance wasn't good. The health insurance wasn't. He didn't have great benefits as far as like any type of disability. So they're in the process of building a brand new house. They've got 3 kids, and the needs aren't being met. And so there's a lot of prayers going up from not only our family, but then our non-immediate family, our friends are all praying. And I remember as people acted in love out of small acts of obedience, how that blessed our family and how that was answers to our prayers. And without their obedience, we don't see God's provision in those moments. And so it may even create some doubt in our mind, like where is God at in this, where it's really somebody else's obedience that's holding back that blessing from somebody else. But like during that time, seeing people through small acts, they see a bunch of hungry kids. So they're like, you know what, we're going to buy groceries for them. Yeah. They see a mortgage payment that's not, a brand new house with a mortgage payment that's not going to be met, and they're dropping money off. And anyhow, long story short, through that whole ordeal, I don't remember not eating. I don't look like I didn't eat, at least. And then and that was the house I grew up in. So the house that he wasn't able to work for during that time of about a 6-month period. Every single time the need was met. There was always There was always money there. There was always a way that God was providing, but it was through somebody else's obedience, somebody else's act of love that our provision was able to be met. And I think that ties in pretty good with what was going on in Jerusalem at this time. I think that they had a legitimate need, and without the reliance of the other churches to be able to meet that need, without their obedience, I think that the need goes unmet.
Yeah, this really does wrap up. I know we're just getting into the conversation today, but this really does wrap up well all the things that he's been saying throughout the book of Corinthians, in that like love demonstrates itself this way. Christ loved us this way, and particularly within the church, because I'm thinking back of a couple of weeks ago when I recorded I think it was chapter 14. He starts this whole. He's going to talk about spiritual gifts, and he's going to talk about how to keep order within a service, and he starts it all with the idea of, now before you do anything else, before you have any other thoughts, remember, love is the purpose of everything. And that's my paraphrase. So but he's like, how you worship together has to embody love. If it doesn't, and so there's these practical things you can do. You keep order within a service. You don't dominate each other. Don't do it for your own gain. You know what I mean? So he gives all these practical things, because I think we are tangible people in a tangible world. We're embodied people in a physical world, and God, that's not lost on God, I don't think. You know what I mean? Because I think it could be God loved us and we feel this feeling inside of us, and that's how we experience it. Right. But it is the fact that we both get that experience from time to time, but we also have his body, his flesh and his blood, the church, show up in ways that meet our tangible needs, like you said with your dad and them. So I think it's such a beautiful picture of the gospel. It's such a beautiful thing that Paul wants to be embedded on their minds, that when we take purpose steps to demonstrate love and meet needs, like we are embodying who Christ is as a church. So I think that's amazing. So look, did you have any other thoughts before I keep going on?
I was going to say, one of the other things, like just even, and all of us are prone to this, I think, to a certain degree, but even kind of societal ways of viewing it, that it is a feeling, it's an emotion. And obviously there's a part of that.
Sure.
But I just think about, even in the context of like, being a husband, being a wife, being a dad, a mom, like there are times, right, where you don't feel certain things that you would like to feel.
Yeah.
There's this disorientation of like, I don't feel like I want to be a dad right now because my kids are really, really getting under my skin and they're upsetting me. I don't feel like I want to be a husband right now because my wife is, whatever it may be.
You don't finish that one.
No. I'll get in trouble. No, but I think the idea, right, is like the importance of seeing love through concrete action, because regardless of what you might be feeling, you can still act. Regardless of what your emotions might be doing in that specific time, you can still act. You can still do things that show practical care for people. And so I think that's just an important element that oftentimes is lost on us, is that, it's not always about how you feel. And we can do things regardless of how we're feeling in a specific season or time frame.
Yeah. And not to keep the conversation going, but Mick, you and I were talking about this a little bit yesterday. Since he was talking about finances, like one of the things that I think where that trips people up is we hear this statement that, and I think he makes it in 1 Corinthians, but that you should give out of a cheerful heart. You should that they should be without compulsion or whatnot.
Yeah.
The reality, like that's great. That is the ultimate like goal, I think. You know what I mean? Like I think God wants us to be generous, both in how we feel about it and also in how we act. Sure. But at times I think you're spot on. Like we are generous, period. And then sometimes we feel generous, you know what I mean? And so like I think that's the reality of like, and I don't know if that's part of our brokenness that we can't keep the emotional state all the time that we should feel or what, but God does give us discipline and purposeness so that we can embody love, even though we may not be feeling it in that moment. You know what I mean? And so it's not an excuse. If you don't feel like giving, that's not an excuse to not give. Well, that was just my shameless plug for that.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
All right. Picking up in verse 5. I'm coming to visit you after I have been to Macedonia, for I'm planning to travel through Macedonia. Perhaps I will stay a while with you, possibly all winter, and then you can send me on my way to my next destination. This time, I don't want to make just a short visit and then go right on. I want to come and stay a while. If the Lord will let me, in the meantime, I will be staying here at Ephesus until the festival of Pentecost. There is a wide open door for great work here, although many oppose me. When Timothy comes, don't intimidate him. This is the weirdest, that's the weirdest instruction I've ever heard. Like, when Timothy comes, make sure you don't give him a hard time.
Yeah.
Like, don't lord it over him. But anyhow, sorry. He is doing the Lord. It just strikes me as funny. Some of the way the things are worded. He is doing the Lord's work just as I am. Don't let anyone treat him with contempt. Send him on his way with your blessing when he returns to me. I expect him to come with the other believers. Now, about our brother Apollos, I urged him to visit you with the other believers, but he was not willing to go right now. He will see you later when he has the opportunity. All right, so he continues on in this, these practical instructions on how to kind of manage and operate as a church and how to demonstrate love. And he tells him, he's like, I desire to be with you, but I can't. So in my stead, I want to send some leaders who can help you process through all of these things that we've been talking about. And so he kind of demonstrates or exhorts these leaders that he says, hey, make sure that you treat them well. So thinking about this whole concept of why Paul would send someone in his stead, why is the leadership that they have important, and why is it important that they understand that Paul is sending them with his authority? Like, why is that such an important part of this? Like, why does he have to exhort these leaders to the Corinthian church?
Yeah, I mean, obviously early on in the early chapters, I mean, the leadership situation is a little bit rocky, right? You have kind of these cliques of people in the church that are like, I follow this guy, I follow this guy. And so there's obviously it's causing some contention, some division. And as you mentioned earlier, I mean, one of Paul's greatest desires is to see love and unity in the churches. So he's in some ways seeing the opposite of that. So I think that's one thing. It's kind of the posture of the Corinthian church to have issues with certain individuals. He's already addressed that. So I think there's that awareness. So them coming kind of on in his authority and him sending them, it's kind of like, hey, listen, these people are going to come not just to throw it down and not just to make sure everything is going right, but there's the other part of Paul, like the pastoral part of Paul, where you see throughout the epistles, like he genuinely has a love and concern for the churches. So in addition to that, there's many times throughout the epistles where he's addressing people who have crept into the church, false teachers, people that are causing problems. So you could tell it's one of those things on his heart. He genuinely cares about them. He cares about their growth in their spiritual progress, their well-being. So I think for him, it's not just an issue of, I'm sending somebody who's going to throw it down and make sure you guys keep things in order. Yeah. Even though that's a part of it, right?
Yeah,
I mean, the Corinthian church, man, it's reading through the book of 1 Corinthians is like, it's kind of like a soap opera where it's dramatic. There's some crazy stuff going on. But I really do. I think if you take everything that Paul says throughout the epistles, he has a pastor's heart. He cares about people. Yeah. In fact, I think it's in Philippians 2 where he specifically mentions Timothy and he says, I have no one else like him who will, care about you guys and cares about the concerns of Jesus Christ. They care about their concerns. So there's this concept of like, he's even struggling with trustworthy people to send to the churches, people that he knows are going to go with the right posture, right heart, that love the Lord, love the churches. So I think, for him, it's not only just an issue of authority. I think his heart is to see things done in a way where the people feel loved, encouraged, but also, there's accountability in that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. That's more or less the way that I kind of had that, probably in a less glamorous way, but kind of the first thing that that was kind of pulled out to me was Paul has the desire to stay, but he's like, you know what, God's will is better than mine. Whatever he's got planned is going to be good. So if it's not his will that I stay right now, I'll figure out another time. I'll be back. But right now I need to go do what God has for me. But I'm going to send this guy that is like-minded like me, which is Timothy. Yeah. But he also, I think there's a little bit like, I don't think Timothy quite had the qualifications yet of Paul. A little bit younger and probably not the confidence behind him, like the leadership ability. So he's like, you know what? I'm going to send him. He's got good stuff, but don't give him a hard time because of who he is. Let him be. He's like-minded like me. He's got the same heart as me. So just trust that he's got what's best for you.
Well, it's funny that in I think it's in 1 Timothy when he tells Timothy, like, don't let others lord it over you. Like,
don't let them despise you for your youth. 1 Timothy 4:12. Yeah.
Yeah. So he tells him, he's like, don't let them give you a hard time because you're young. He's like,
crazy.
And so like, you just see it's amazing and beautiful and funny that you see like this development through the different books of Timothy's leadership. And for what we know, Timothy becomes one of the elders in Ephesus, and he becomes like this major church leader. But it's funny to see that he's still young. He has insecurities. Mm-hmm. He has things he's learning and growing in, and yet Paul still entrusts him and calls him to be part of this, to this beautiful thing of leading this church and addressing the issues of this church. And so, as leaders, we have the ability to identify with Paul and with Timothy as this happens. Like, so we sit on the side of this conversation where we go, we lead people. And what we want from them is to trust us. We want them to believe that our intentions are good and right towards them. And this, Paul argues all of this, like, again, through Corinthians, he's like, I was like a father to you. Like, and so like he wants to establish this relationship between the leader and those being led. And yet at the same time, he's instructing them and he's teaching them, because the way that they're responding to the leaders and the way that they're responding does not make it an easy thing to lead them. Now, without this being a complaint session or anything like that, as leaders, how does the attitude of the group that you lead affect how you lead? Like, how does it, do you understand my question?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mick, go ahead.
All right. I'm going to step back just a second and kind of look at Paul's example first. So he's super supportive of his people that he's appointing to be leaders. He's super supportive of Timothy, as we've already seen. He's super supportive of Apollos. He's saying, listen, this guy's not ready to go yet, so we're just going to let it be until he's ready to go. So he's respecting the people that he's appointing. So we look at, from a leadership standpoint, the people that he's sending, he's got a great leadership model of how he should be treating his people. But then on the flip side, as a leader, so you take Timothy, for example, that he's being told, the group is being told, not to give him a hard time, to accept him, to bless him. I think when people have confidence in their leadership, when they're supportive of them, when they're not trying to nitpick maybe every little thing they're doing, it gives the leader a confidence to be able to lead that maybe isn't otherwise there. You take that in, I mean, if we want to take it completely out of the church world and just even put it into the everyday practical, whether you're leading a sports team or whatever, when people have confidence in you, it gives you a confidence to be able to lead, and it also gives you a respect for them to where you're able to respect them better. And it just makes this is kind of where I went back to the survival thing, being able to work as a team, whether you're leading that team or, because there's going to be situations where you're going to be leading the team and situations where you're just going to be a guy on the team. But being confident in your leadership, being supportive of your leadership, I think is super important for the team to be able to function well. And especially in the church, having confidence in the people that are put in leadership, instead of trying to pick apart their systems, trying to nitpick what they're doing, to come along as a support and to get behind what they're doing and say, you know what, this can be better, not because I'm going to change all of your systems, but because I'm going to support you in whatever you have, and then work through it as they work through it.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many facets to this. I think one of them is just the posture of what it means to be a Christ follower. And I think a huge part of that is a posture of humility. So I think even just having that type of posture, I mean, he's talking to members of the church, right? People who are supposed to be Christ followers, imitating Christ. So I think there's that part of it, is like, we should always be considering the way that we're posturing ourselves, whether that's in a position of leadership or if it's in a position of submission to leadership. Yeah. Just that concept of humility, I think, is a big one. I think just even thinking through, like, Jesus Christ has established a certain way of setting up his church, right? Like, and there's many places in the New Testament where, it says that the leadership is put there ultimately for the good, right? For the good of the church. And so I think one of the difficult things is, like, if you are in ministry, if you're a pastor, if you're an elder, if you're a director leading people, your desire, your heart, assuming your motives are pure, right? That you can help people, you can help them grow, help them develop, help them learn, help them grapple through issues of life and difficult seasons, all of those things. And so it makes it very difficult if people are not wanting to cooperate with that, right? In a lot of ways, it almost handicaps your ability to lead them and to do your job well, kind of like what Mick was saying. I think not only from a posture of confidence, which another thing, like, leaders are people too, right? And so fellow Christians should be treating leaders as fellow brothers and sisters, as fellow human beings. And I think that's another major issue, maybe even in the church today, right? Is kind of the celebrity pastor thing, is this major disconnect, almost as if they're not real people. And so pastors need encouraged too. Pastors face all kinds of discouragement. And so there's that humanness part of it. But I also think from a leadership standpoint, it's really hard for you to do your job well and to help people along, in the progress of their faith if they're not cooperating with you. To some degree, I mean, they get to dictate that. Is like, if you don't want this, then there's nothing ultimately I can do. Like if you are bucking up against that, I can't help you.
Yeah. Now, Anthony, you mentioned something in the lines of like the celebrity pastors, and like there is a level of this where I think it's important for us to look at it from the flip side with what needs to happen in a leader for that type of thing to happen. So for the trust to be built, for the cooperation to happen, from a follower standpoint, what are things that they need to see in leaders that allow that to happen? You know what I'm saying? Because there is broken situations where leaders have taken advantage of their authority, of their position, of those things. And I think some people just get kind of leery of like, I don't know that I can just carte blanche trust someone because somebody else says so. So what are the things in a leader that are important to embody so that you can foster that trust and you can foster that cooperation?
I would say, so one of the things, and I can just speak personally myself, one of the things I've realized over the years is that I'm naturally a talker. And so my heart for people is I want to help them. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, I want to teach them. I want to instruct them. I want to give them any wisdom I've gleaned over the years, all of those things. But what I've realized is actually I need to probably a lot of times do a lot less of that and a lot more listening. And so I think even just that, again, going back to the humility thing, I'm not the sage on the stage who's going to, kind of the Messiah complex. I'm not going to fix all your problems, but I care about you. I want to hear your story. I want to hear what's going on. So I think listening is a big one, listening to people's stories, listening to where they are. Demonstrating that humility. I think even just like being a man of the people, you hear a lot of people will kind of tell these stories of like, I've never even met my pastor. They don't come, and you're just like, I don't know if you can really shepherd people and lead people if you don't know them. And if you're not willing to, rub shoulders with them. So I think that's another thing, being intentional in showing that there is no disconnect here between me as a leader and you as a member of the church or whatever it might be, a member of the team. I think being real with your own weaknesses and vulnerabilities. And I think leaders have to be careful with this one, right? Because I don't think pastors should be up there venting about all their personal problems, but I think that's another way to help individuals understand that, again, this is a human being, down to earth, accessible, relatable. So I think those are just a couple things off the top of my head that I would say, flipping the script of I'm kind of up here at the podium and I'm different than you. I'm not approachable. I've got it all figured out. Those are the types of things where it's like, that's hard to relate to someone like that when you are in the thick of life and all the stuff that comes with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was going to say too, like even to the back end of that, like, man, if you can embody the things that you want to see out of the people following you. So if you want them to trust you, be the type of person who's trustworthy. You know what I mean? Find the ways to demonstrate your trustworthiness. If you want people to relate to you, be relatable, like what you said. And I even think, like, looking at what Paul said, you mentioned it earlier, how Paul's desire, he expresses his desire. I really wish I could be with you guys right now. I really wish that I could be there. Yeah. I wish I could be in this place with you. He's like, I can't, but, and so like, but being able to embody those things that we would want and expect from those that would follow, I think just really demonstrates demonstrates that well. So
that was one of the things that just that relational side of things. Like I find it so interesting that he says in verse 7, this time I don't want to just make a short visit and then go right on. I want to come and stay a while if the Lord will let me. And just that, like, one of the things that came to mind as I read that is like, ministry should not be transactional.
Yeah.
It should be relational. And this idea of like, I'm not just giving you a little soundbite of wisdom here, go fix your problem, but it really in a very real way is getting in the trenches of relationships with people. And I love that, like, Paul models that not only here in what he's saying, but throughout, the epistles in the book of Acts, and he models it well.
Awesome. Let's pick up in verse 13. And this is going to feel like he goes in a completely different direction. And honestly, he doesn't. And so he's going to be continuing his thought from what he just talked about. I mean, he was talking about Apollos, and he was talking about wanting to come and visit them and giving them instruction on how to treat their leaders. But he shifts to this, what I find to be like these 4 or 5 like very important things. He's like, listen, you need to pay attention to these things. And so this is what he says, and he says this in verse 13. He says, be on your guard. He says, stand firm in the faith, be courageous, be strong. So I said it earlier, like the idea of imperatives, commands. So he gives these 4 commands. He says, be on your guard, stand firm, be courageous, be strong. And then he says, and do everything with love. So like he just reminds them one more time, like, hey, everything that we do, the entire purpose of what we live, why you need to be on your guard, why you need to stand firm, why you need to be courageous, why you need to be strong, is so that you do everything in love. And the idea of this, and the idea of the fact that he has to teach them in the first place, kind of brings us to the place where these commands are necessary. This reminder is necessary for us as people that we're gonna have to do these things in difficult situations, I think is what I'm getting at. And so why, and this is the way I kind of worded the question that I want to pose to you, is why this is here and now. So why does Paul put this right here on the back of these other instructions? And why do the everyday things such as giving, serving, honoring leaders require this type of pep talk? Like, why does he need to give this reminder right here and right now as they think about and look forward to accepting these leaders, living out their faith in this way? Does that question make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Go ahead, Nick.
So I think one of the reasons why he said this is, like, all of the things that he's talking about require sacrifice. The Church of Corinth was not, they didn't, if we kind of read back, they did not do a good job of this in the past. So after Paul founded the church and he kind of left, they were thriving, and then they were not. So that's why I think
putting it lightly.
Yeah, I think that's why he's telling them, he's like all of the things that happened last time, these are the things that we don't want to happen. And then he gives them kind of a, as you're saying, why do we need a pep talk on these other things? They all require sacrifice. They all require faith on our part. These things are not things that come naturally, like we've mentioned multiple times. Yeah. These are things that we've got to keep ingraining in our mind. It sometimes needs reminders from leadership of, hey, this is what you should be doing. It's the reason why we do a lot of things at the church. The reason why we have these, why we do Bible studies, is the reason why we have anything that relates to discipleship. Is it's a continual ingraining in our minds of, these are the things that you need to be doing. This is what you're called to do, and you're going to see blessing out of it. Doesn't that may look different in different situations, but these are the things that we're called to do. And so it's just a constant reminder of I kind of put everything in really simple. That's just the way my mind works. I'm not a complicated person, but like I think of, even as I played baseball growing up, and as I was doing that, like ingraining the most simple fundamentals of baseball in my mind was what kept me a decent baseball player. Not great, but a decent baseball player was continuing to work on the fundamentals. Yeah. And as you go from T-ball to a high school or even college level ball, things don't change. Like, there's still, I was actually watching a Reds game the other day, and they were critiquing a shortstop about how far his glove was out in front of him. Like, one of the most basic concepts of infielding. And they're still having to be reminded of that as a professional athlete. And So as I was thinking about these things, I was like, man, that's kind of the same thing. It's something that requires discipline on our part. It's something that requires faith and sacrifice. And so the continual reminding, the continual going back to those things, I think is super important for us to continue to do those things well.
So to some degree, and you kind of led into this, and really, like, as I was thinking through this and preparing this, the heart of it goes into, these seem like everyday things: giving, serving, honoring the leaders. Like, these aren't like grand, spectacular,
right,
like big things. They're things that just take place in our normal everyday lives. Why does our normal everyday lives require awareness, faithfulness, courage, and strength, like, to get through? You know what I mean? Like, it shouldn't seem like that should be a necessary part of it, but Paul very much makes, like, these very big things a part of doing the very small things of our everyday life.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just to piggyback or echo what Mick was saying. I think a lot of these things are counterintuitive. And so, the way that I think about it is, right, if spiritual progress is kind of like climbing a hill, or, rolling up a hill, or pushing your way, like, if you stop, you're going to start rolling backwards. And I think one of the big lies is that we can kind of just exist in a neutral place. And I don't think that that's true. Like, I ultimately think we're progressing in our faith, or we're regressing. So I think a part of that, like, even just starting off with be on guard, I think Jesus in the garden, be watchful, watch and pray against temptation. This idea of, like, we have to be sober-minded, we have to be vigilant, we have to be alert, we have to be intentional with the way that we live our lives from the time that we get up in the morning, because so much of our lives is reactive to the things that happen to us. And so it's almost putting those guardrails in place to prepare ourselves for what the day is going to bring. What's going to happen when your coworker says something that's super arrogant and frustrates you? How are you going to deal? I mean, you can come up with a million scenarios. What are you going to do when you get bad news? I think there's so many situations in life where we can't control, but we can control how we prepare ourselves, our minds, our bodies, our souls, even just spiritually speaking. How do we prepare for those things? So I think for him, it goes back to that being proactive versus being reactive. I do not think the Christian life is something that can be done in a spirit of apathy or laziness. And so I think there is a proactive, intentional element of, like, you have to, to use his Ephesians 6 model, like, you have to kind of gear for battle. Even this language sounds a little bit like battle to me, right? Like, be on guard, stand firm, be courageous, be strong. And I think it is, right? Like, I mean, Paul used the language of fighting the good fight. That we are in a battle. We are in a fight every day. And I love that he tacks on there and do everything with love, because our battle is not against people, right? It is not against flesh and blood. So there's this element of, like, we're battling, our flesh. We're battling Satan and demonic forces. We're battling systems of this world that are opposed to the kingdom of God. Therefore, because of all of that, be on guard, prepare yourselves and get ready, because this is going to hit you in the face from the second that you wake up in the morning. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah. And this is what typically happens to me, is I'll fumble over my words as I'm getting my thoughts. So, but this idea of love requiring these things in our lives, like, we fight for love, not against people. I love how you said that. So, so can you think of any examples in your life where you've seen how love has required awareness, diligence, courage, and strength? Like, I don't think we think of particularly courage and strength. We don't think of that as a quality that fosters love. Why do we need those characteristics to embody love in our lives? Do you have an example, like personal examples? I'm throwing you on the spot here. So.
If you've got one, go for it.
No, I don't know if I have just a personal example. I mean, I think marriage is obviously a big one, because it's one that you're basically locked into every day for those who are married. But I think even just like, so the awareness element of, like, even just having conversations of, like, I blew it this time, and I want to know why that happened. I want to know how it made you feel. I think, again, just going back to that intentionality of, figuring out what does this look like, the continual reassessment. And again, to me, that just ties in with not being apathetic. Like, if your heart is to continually become more like Christ, and thereby becoming more like Christ, becoming more loving, I think one element is that self-awareness. What are my tendencies? What are the weak areas of my life? What are my proclivities that tend to lean not being loving? If I just do these things out of knee jerk, this is not going to come off very loving. So I think part of that is like self-awareness. Part of it is like the other awareness. Like I think of Jesus, the classic story where, the woman with the flow of blood, and it's been pointed out, people have preached sermons on it, but just this idea of like not seeing the woman as an interruption to his mission. Like he's going to heal a little girl that's on her deathbed. And like, I just imagine myself being there, like, Jesus, what are you doing? This is an urgent thing.
Yeah.
So like, even just that concept of like being aware of the people around you, being aware of the needs. I think of people who every day they get up, they go to work, they're rubbing shoulders with people who are hurting, they're broken. Are we attentive to, so that would be like the be on guard, be aware, that sober mindedness, standing firm in the faith. I think, again, just being aware of our natural bent towards selfishness. So being courageous, being strong, there is a sense in which this takes perseverance. Like you have to continue to chip away at what it looks like to be a servant-hearted type person, what it looks like to demonstrate humility, what it looks like to put others' needs before yourself. It's in a very real way, it's not for the faint of heart. If you want an easy life, just live selfishly.
Love is not the way to go if you want, if you're faint of heart.
Yeah.
I didn't really come up with any specific examples of this. I'd probably be better coming up with examples in my own life of when I did not apply these things.
Absolutely.
So when I was like thinking about love requiring awareness, diligence, courage, and strength, I was like, man, all of the times that I'm out and you realize later like the missed opportunities that you had because you weren't on guard, because you weren't aware of your surroundings, because you weren't diligent about trying to do exactly what God had. Could be courage too, of not being able to make a move. Something that I've really purposed since I've started this, the job here at the church, is to not make no my first answer. To at least say I'll think about it. Now sometimes that leads to no's, as Chris knows, but even like this is definitely not my comfort zone. Being on a podcast probably wouldn't even be one of my strengths in my mind. But as I think through it, I'm like, man, I could be missing out on an opportunity, or maybe my simplistic thinking of not maybe just applying to the common folk that's the way my mind works. But like maybe there's something that I have to say. So not saying no first, trying to take that posture of courage, be aware that maybe God can use me in a certain way, and then do it not for myself. I mean, obviously I don't plan on being the next whoever in podcasts. So not doing it for myself, but doing it out of the mind of love for other people. So that's good. So probably I could think of more missed opportunities than opportunities where I've fallen into those 4 or 5 categories of saying, yeah, in these situations I was super courageous and I was super aware and I was super loving. Like I probably think of the opposite, but yeah.
Go ahead.
That's okay. Go ahead.
I just was gonna, when you talked about like the courageous aspect, I think like there's been situations in my life. I think of one of them when I was still a young believer, hadn't been a Christian very long. And I felt like the compulsion of the Holy Spirit to pray for someone, like to pray for healing for someone. And I just remembered like, nope, don't want to do that.
Hard pass.
Hard pass. Absolutely. So like, even thinking in terms of what does it mean to love people, like there are times where the Spirit of God is going to prompt you to do something that you're like, wait, did that come from God? Am I making this up? Because I don't really want to do that. That's uncomfortable. So like even that element of being courageous, we oftentimes think of it only in terms of like, going into battle, you might lose your life, but you might look stupid. That's another one. Like doing this, maybe it's going to make you look dumb, or, your credibility's on the line. And so I think there's a lot of those situations in life where I need to be courageous to love people well. I need to be able to step out of my comfort zone. Kind of like Mick was saying, even coming on the podcast, this isn't my wheelhouse, but I'm going to do it because I feel like it's, honoring God and it's going to benefit people.
I was going to say like, that's where my mind went. Well, like as I was reading this passage, there are times where I think like, particularly as men, I think we get this idea of like, we want to exude strength. We want to be confident. We want to be courageous. We want to do these bold, daring things. And I think about it in a way of like, I love running. I love running for really for long distances. I want to continue to grow in that. Like, it takes a lot of strength, courage, and diligence to do that. Mm-hmm. So at the end of the day, I can accomplish that if I'm embodying strength, courage, and those types of things. But it takes just as much, if not more, strength and courage for me to engage my daughter who's having a bad day. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, to love her well and to meet her in the place where she's at, even when I'm tired and overwhelmed and when I've got my own stuff going on, like, to be patient with her as opposed to just being like, just go away right now. Like, you're being grumpy. Deal with it. Yeah, just deal with it. You know what I mean? Which, and I've failed at that many times. So I'm not putting that up as an example, but I'm just saying, like, it's those spaces of love where we go, like, yeah, that's not easy. Engaging's not easy. Like, doing that thing right there, doing dishes at night when I go home, like, that takes courage, diligence, and strength. You know what I'm saying? Because like, these ways in which we've embodied these things or defined these things in our culture, like, this is just kind of counterintuitive in my mind of, we don't think of love being requiring these things, and yet I think it requires more than accomplishing these supernatural feats of these physical feats or of strength.
Yeah, it's not just the big things, it's the little things.
Yeah,
it's good.
All right, so let's wrap up. We're gonna get through these last couple verses here, and then we'll wrap up our podcast. So, you know that Stephanus and his household were the first of the harvest of believers in Greece, and they are spending their lives in service to God's people. I urge you, dear brothers and sisters, to submit to them and others like them who serve with such devotion. I'm very glad that Stephanus, Fortunus, and Achaicus, there we go, have come here. They have been providing the help you weren't here to give me, which sounds like Paul's putting a dig there. So, but I don't think he is, but it sounds like
he's slamming him.
Yeah. They have been a wonderful encouragement to me as they have been to you. You must show your appreciation to all who serve so well. The churches here in the province of Asia send greetings in the Lord, as do Aquila and Priscilla and all the others who gather in their home to church meetings. All the brothers and sisters here send greetings to you. Greet each other with a sacred kiss. Here is my greeting in my own hand. Paul. If anyone does not love the Lord, that person is cursed. Our Lord come. May the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ be with you. May the love to all of you in Christ, my love to all of you in Christ Jesus. So, okay, so that weird second ending that he's got there, if you don't know, Paul would not have been writing these in his own hand. For one, they think that he had trouble with his eyes, so he had trouble seeing to write. But most of all, he would have hired a scribe to take down dictation and take down the thoughts of what was going on in the room when him and Timothy and all of those guys were sitting around talking. So somebody would have been writing this stuff out for Paul. But at the end of each letter, he tends to do this thing where he's like, so I'm going to give these final instructions in my own hand. And you can see they're short, little punchy sentences. So maybe he did have trouble writing or something like that. You know what I mean? So that's why you get that like almost secondary ending. But what we are really looking at as he finishes off, he gives a couple more names of people that they should honor, that they should look to. And it really just kind of brings us to this place where Paul puts in front of the Corinthian church models of this Christ-likeness that he wants to see embodied in them. And he keeps pointing them to people, whether it be Apollos, whether it be himself, or whether it be Timothy, or whether it be Stephanus and his household. Like, all of these people, he keeps putting in front of them and saying, hey, if you look to their lives and see the way in which they live, like, then you'll see what it means to be Christ-like and what it means to live for other people and serve other people. In your lives, well, let me go back to the theory side of this first. Why are mentors or idols, or however you want to say it, like whatever term you want to use, champions of the faith, like why are they so important? People that have gone before us and model Christian life well, why is that model, why is that thing, that person so important to be there for us? Why do we need mentors and guides in our Christian walk?
I think that a mentor in anything is super important, whether that's on a really super practical side of like something you're going through in life. I mean, could be something as simple as your diet or your exercise. Having someone there to guide you is super important. Help us to establish discipline, helps to maybe guide you on a correct path, maybe even some level of accountability. So I think mentors in the faith do that same thing. I mean, whether you look at people in the Bible, as far as what they've done for direction, the way that they loved, the way that they served other people, the way that they maybe failed and then came back to the faith in even a stronger way. Just the way that they served, I think, is super important. And then as I think in just even in my everyday life, why I need mentors, same reasons as I would need them for diet or anything else. It's somebody that's there to help push me forward, help push me out of my comfort zone, even maybe help build confidence. I know you may not know this, but I kind of look to you as a mentor on our staff, somebody that I look up to. And then I know that you've pushed me out of comfort zones. Like, you've asked me to do things that I probably typically would not have been comfortable doing, maybe still not comfortable doing, but and then instill confidence too. Like say, whether that's a word of encouragement afterwards or thank you for doing that, or maybe even direction. That's something that's hard to take from a mentor, but taking critique on something like, hey, this is what you did. This is a way that you can improve on that. And especially when it comes to our faith, being able to call us out on things, like say, hey, this is an area that I really see that you could improve, because it may be something that we just don't see. Going back to a simple analogy, exercise, there's people that are good at that. We work out as a staff, and sometimes I program workouts. I don't think that I'm great at it. And there's people that are really great at it that can target different muscles, and it's to help build you up. They know that balance of like when you need direction in a certain area, like, hey, don't do that, do this instead. And how much stronger you get because of that. And the same thing in our Christian faith, is you have those good, strong mentors that are able to look at you, maybe make correction when needed, maybe give encouragement when needed, and maybe even give you that accountability of I know that if I do this, that Chris is going to come to me and he's going to check me on it, or he's going to ask me about it later, and then I'm going to have to answer for that. And then just even being able to look at different things that our mentors are doing, like the way that you study the Bible, the way that you dig into it, like that's encouraging to me. And I'm like, man, I want to get to that level. I don't want to always be for the common folk. No, but no, I want to be able to get to that level to where my understanding is even better. So I'm taking these different approaches that you've had to studying out the Bible and trying to apply that in my studies. And I think that is a continual growing process. So.
Yeah, it's funny. The words that you used were almost in my mind the exact words. Like literally the 3 words were support, challenge, and accountability. Like everybody needs that support, that encouragement, someone that they know is for them. Everybody needs a person that can challenge them and call out the stuff in their life, as you said, that might be blind spots, or they didn't even, if they're a young person in the faith, they're like, I didn't even know this was something I shouldn't be doing, those types of conversations. So that challenge, I think support and challenge is, both of those elements are crucial for growth. And then the accountability of like, we have something that we're actually aiming at, we have a target, and we can kind of use those metrics to look at that. But I also think just like the importance of a mentor, I think part of it is just the way that our brains are wired. I mean, you think about all the stuff you hear about, children and what they pick up from their parents versus what parents tell them and how they're actually living their lives. And so like part of it is just the way that we're hardwired as people. I think it's, it's the Jesus way. I know that's the simple answer of like, he had these men who were with him and they saw what he did. They had conversations, they processed it after they did it, all of those things. So it was a very, very much a hands-on exercise for them. It's kind of the concept of an apprenticeship, right? You can't just learn the conceptual side of things. This is what you need to be an electrician. This is what you need to be a plumber. No, you need to see it done. I need to do it with you. So I think there's an important part of that as well that is crucial for a person to grow. Yeah.
Have you guys ever gotten to a project where you thought, like, you watch the YouTube video and you're like, yeah, I can do that, and then you get into it and you're like, oh man, that is way more than what that guy showed in that video.
Yeah. I had a friend that called me the other day. Well, it's been a while back, and he actually used a term for it. He called me up and he's like, hey, I need your help on this. He said, I've got myself into a mickle. And I was like, what's that? He's like, it's a problem that I can't solve, so I needed to call Mick. And I was like, all right, that makes sense.
Love it.
That's funny. Yeah, that happens to me all the time. But now, do you guys have mentors in your life that you can think about? Like, and you don't have to say their names, or maybe you do. Maybe you can't say their names or whatnot, but like, do you guys have mentors in your lives right now that you look to for those things?
Yeah. So I, obviously, because, we're totally new to this area. I don't have someone like physically here,
Sure.
but I've had a couple of older men in my life throughout the years of my faith and even in ministry. And honestly, like they're guys that like I love. They're guys that love me. And at the same time, they are guys that will knock me down if I need to be knocked down. And as much as that is uncomfortable, like there have been some really great conversations over the years where, where I might have did something or said something that wasn't maybe quite what it should have been. And, they came to me and talked to me about it and they challenged me. And so, it's still to this day, those are the types of conversations that stick with me. And even as I think about that out loud, like, what that means for my growth, right? Those aren't just lessons that I learned and then kind of just forgot about. It's like those were things that stuck with me when they challenged me, when they were willing to call me out in it. So yeah, for me, I think it's been absolutely essential to have somebody that is 100% for you. They genuinely love you. They're going to support you. They're going to be praying with you, praying for you, but they also are the type of person that are going to be able to cut through all of the other junk and say, hey, look, I see this going on and we need to have a conversation about this. So I've had that and I think benefited immensely from it.
Yeah, I would say the same. Like, especially my high school, early college years, I can think of a gentleman in particular that was really influential in really shaping what I believed. He was an active member of our church, but even his thought process, I felt like was so far beyond what I was even able to get from there. And just being able to spend a lot of time with him. I was 16 years old and he was probably in his 60s, and I would have considered him one of my best friends. Like it was that kind of relationship. And even he's passed now, but even looking back at like the things that I was taught during those moments, like some of that stuff I'm still learning from, I'm still figuring out. And then even now, I could think of a few guys that I rely on pretty heavily for advice, for encouragement, for being challenged when I need to be challenged or corrected when I need to be corrected. So,
yeah, mine was a couple when I was a teenager. Once I got saved, I started going to. I think I was 18 and then started going to college. And the people that took me to the conference where I got saved, the lady her name is Sarah and her husband Shane, and they would let me just come and sit at their kitchen table and we would just have conversations. And I mean, I commuted back and forth from college to home, and I think I stopped at least 3 of the 5 days of the school week. And awesome. So they would feed me dinner and they would just answer questions and we would just laugh and just do life together. And it was their encouragement. It was their like just taking the time for that, like really fostered into me, like what faith was, like how faith was to make it my own, what it meant to be called by God into ministry, because they were youth pastors at the time. And so like what that looked like and what it looked like to follow Jesus, despite all my faults and failures, and learning what that looked like as an 18-year-old young man. So like a huge part of my life. Yeah. That pretty much wraps us up for our study of 1 Corinthians. That's the end of that chapter and end of that book. And so we'll be picking up next week in 2 Corinthians chapter 1. But before we get done, is there anything else, any other final thoughts, anything that just kind of stuck out to you guys in our study today, or even in the book as a whole, as you reflect on kind of what we've gone through, anything stand out to you that you just want to kind of close with before we shut this down?
I would just say as an overall theme, like I'm amazed at the level of grace that Paul is able to offer to the Corinthians, like despite everything that's going on, despite some of the rebukes and challenges that he offers to them in these letters. I think to me, like that is such an encouragement and a challenge as someone in ministry, because it can get very easy, right, to become discouraged, to become frustrated. One of the hardest things to me as a pastor over the years is pouring your heart out into people and then watching them walk away. And even just to see Paul, that he has experienced that. He writes about it in some other epistles where there's people that have abandoned him, he alone, just the language he uses, he's acquainted with the grief of ministry and people So I think just to me, like it's such an encouragement and a challenge to see the level of grace that he demonstrates even to the most unruly bunch of Christians, that he's addressing here. So I think that's just a great thing to remind us as Christians, as leaders, how we lead other people, how we treat other people, even in the worst of times.
Yeah.
Yeah. We obviously, well, maybe people didn't know that we don't share notes ahead of time. So but that's basically what I had down in maybe not so well-spoken words, was that the book, these chapters in here could be taken as a discouragement, especially if you're looking at leadership, Paul starting that church, the way that it started, the way it was going. But I think that it's an encouragement, knowing like how Paul went back there. He's encouraging them, hey, don't give up. He's resetting for them. He's getting them back on track. And even for the people of the church to know that there is support from their leaders, that he's understanding that they've went through a rough season, that things haven't been as he maybe had even anticipated. But then on the flip side of that, he's giving them encouragement. He's restructuring. He's sending them leaders to guide them. So rather than take this book and look at it as a real discouraging, like these people were failures, and Paul's looking at it that way. The way that he wrapped up the chapter, or this last chapter, of kind of putting a reset on it, and he's like, I'm gonna be back. I'm gonna spend time with you. This isn't over. So just awesome. Like re-encouraging the church, like this is a journey, and I'm on it with you.
That's an amazing insight. Like, so good. The only way, two things that I would say before we wrap up just have kind of been on my mind as we've gone through this, but doing church has been difficult and it's been messy from the get-go. Like, I think people idolize like early church and like things like that, how they had it all together and whatnot. But the church has always had people in it, and people are difficult and messy. And so we're always going to face challenges as a church, or it's something we're always going to have to navigate through, always have to walk through. But keeping the heart that Paul has for his church, like you guys said, he's gracious with them. He's patient with them. He really does model a level of humility, love, and the desire to get them to a place where they live like Christ. And so like what we said with the mentors, like Paul is trying to get them to a goal. He wants them to be like Christ. And he wants them to operate as a church together like Christ. And so that's what as I look back over this book and all the conversations that we've had regarding it, like, you guys' insights is amazing, and it's always going to be difficult, but the constant drive is going to be back to that place of love and unity and Christ-likeness. So like I love this book, and I love every book that I get to study, so I end up loving it by the end of it. So but it's been pretty amazing. The second thing I was going to say is you do a great job, so you need to stop undercutting yourself.
Yeah, absolutely, Mick.
Yeah, you get asked back here for a reason. So you've been on multiple episodes for a reason. You have a lot of great insights, and so don't cut yourself short. But thank you all so much for listening. This has been a great study. I hope you've enjoyed the book of Corinthians. I'm really looking forward to 2 Corinthians. I think if you think 1 Corinthians embodies Paul's humility and his heart and his dependence on God, wait till we get into 2 Corinthians. It's going to be a great story on Paul's dependence on Christ, on how he teaches the church to really dive into the idea of living out of their weaknesses and not just their strengths. So I'm looking forward to that. And so join us next week, and we will pick up in 2 Corinthians. Thanks all for listening again.